Hello, this is Sam Gerrans from truthinthenews.info. Today is Sunday the 10th of April 2022, and I'm going to share some thoughts which I had last night on the subject of Nazis and Nazism in Ukraine. Now, I think that I have access to some of the subtleties of this in a way that I don't think most of my audience will, by virtue of the fact that I speak Russian. So I'm able to listen to people speaking, various people who've been either captured or other clips that I'm sure other people have seen some of. But I can listen to it and catch the nuances in the Russian. I don't speak Ukrainian, but as a Russian speaker, as all Russian speakers, we understand Ukrainian to a certain extent also, in the same way as somebody who speaks Spanish would probably understand a lot of Italian or French and those sorts of things. They're very, very close. So I'm not saying that makes me an authority on this subject, but I do have that access that probably people who listen to this are English speakers, so they in all likelihood don't have that. Now, I wanted to share some thoughts on this. The position of the Russian leadership is that Ukraine is in need of a process of denazification. And certainly there's no question that a Nazi philosophy and is in evidence in Ukraine. But I want to sort of, not exactly unpack it, but get to some subtleties that I think exist here. Now, if and when I watch these distressing, and they are distressing, there's no question about it, clips of various types of Ukrainian soldier who have been captured by the Russians, they fall into three basic categories. So the first category is just a young conscript who has been looking for a reason or an opportunity to surrender without getting shot by his own people. He's just glad to be out. You can see it. So that's one category. I'm not discussing those people right now. The second category are what you might call professional soldiers. These are military men who are professionals, and they've taken a professional view that whatever battle or conflict they were personally involved in wasn't worth continuing. They surrendered. It's not an ideological thing for them. And my view is that the Russians are not particularly concerned about those people. They seem to treat them well and process them. But what they're really looking for is this third category. And it's this category that I want to discuss. And this is what you might call the ideological Nazis. Now, obviously, we've got a lot to contend with when we're discussing Nazis and Nazism. And I'm not here in any way defending those things. What I will say is that those concepts have been invested with values which come from Hollywood films and certain, propaganda quotient since, well, actually before the Second World War, and certainly during it, and most definitely after it. So those things should be taken into view. I'm going to just sort of segue to the second point, which is you see lots of clips of the police in the Donbass and various other places basically breaking into houses very quickly or gaining access to houses. Typically, it goes something like this: open the door doesn't get open, they kick the door in or take it off its hinges or something, go in there, and within 7 seconds you've got some chap covered in Nazi tattoos with his hands behind his back and a cache of paraphernalia, copies of Mein Kampf, swastika flags and all the rest of it. And the Russians point at this and say, this is Nazism. And clearly, at some level it is. But I think it's a bit more subtle than that. And I want to get to why I think that is. It is Nazism, but I think that it is not something necessarily that a genuine Nazi, and by Nazi what I mean is a representative of the Nazi Party in Germany prior to the end of the Second World War in 1945. I think if you sat most of these ideologically driven young men and women, and I'll get to women in a minute, down with average Nazis, genuine Nazis from the Third Reich, I think that those Germans, my view is that they wouldn't recognize what's going on here. Now, the fact is that it seems to me, at least, that the kind of Nazism that we're seeing in Ukraine is it's a parody. It's a caricature rather than anything else. And I've got some reasons for saying that. Firstly, and when I say caricature, I don't mean that in any sort of amusing sense. This is far more, in my view, far more sinister. Obviously, due to propaganda and films, and especially Hollywood, the idea is that all Nazis in Germany were evil, terrible people. I think if you, without discussing or trying to in any way overturn that point of view, I think it's beyond a doubt that if you were to list what the Allies did and what the Axis forces did, I mean, if you take, for example, Dresden, Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all the rest of it, and just put it, made an objective assessment, I don't know who would come out where, but I don't think it's certainly not. Let's put it this way: it's not as clear cut as you would as Hollywood would have you think. I'll give you an example. Now, I'm not for a moment saying that the Germans were not brutal and evil in their war against the Soviet Union, but they also did let all these thousands of young men leave Dunkirk without a scratch, who'd come with the express intention of killing Germans. So I think it's a little bit more complex, than simply good versus evil, although I agree that it's become that latterly. However, when I look at the young men in Ukraine, and I'm talking here about this third category, this ideological category, what I see there is a form of evil that I think is missing from the majority of Germans in the Second World War. That's and the reason why I say that, there's a clip, I'll see if I can find it, for example, which is absolutely chilling, of this Ukrainian, I would say, ideologically driven soldier approaching a Ukrainian old couple, and this poor old lady mistakes him for a Russian soldier, and she comes out with actually a Soviet flag, and he stamps it underfoot and all the rest of it. This is absolutely chilling. I don't know why it's so chilling. It's not that anything within the clip so terrible happens, but it's absolutely blood chilling, this particular clip. I'll see if I can find it and link to it below. But what I do see, and I certainly don't see this in Russians, and I live in Russia, and I've never seen this amongst Russians. What I see in a certain category of Ukrainians is a hatred for Russians that it goes beyond simple jingoism or anything else. It's far deeper than that, and I think that this is the point at which the Nazism kind of epithet, it doesn't exactly break down, but it requires a further amount of consideration. I mean, I've seen clips of Ukrainian soldiers when they kill Russians, where it's the visceral hatred is, and I'm not against hatred. I don't think hatred. I think there's a place for hatred. I'm not one of these people who thinks hate is always bad. Hate exists. It's a natural human emotion. I accept that, but it's striking the intensity of that hatred, and I would say that this isn't something, generally speaking, that genuine Nazis experienced. Sure, they have their point of view. They were fighting for their homeland. There's the whole context of the Weimar Republic, going back to Versailles, what had happened to, the arguments that they put forward. I'm not here to justify those or argue them. I'm just saying that I don't believe that they were motivated by the level of hatred that you really see coming from this third category. The second thing that I don't see in Ukraine, which you did see in the Nazi, in the Third Reich, is what you don't have there, or don't appear to have there. There is no intellectual wing that is visible. Now, in the Third Reich, you had people like Alfred Rosenberg, Goebbels. Yeah, you could disagree with them, certainly, but there was an intellectual argument there. That doesn't seem to be. It doesn't seem to be there at all in the sort of implementation of so-called Nazism that we're seeing in Ukraine. What it looks like to me is a parody, or as I say, a sort of caricature of Nazism. So, but this is what I think is actually happening here. When I look at these young men from this third category, I wish to be specific. There are these three categories of soldier. What the impression that I get is of cult members in the Scientology Mooney sense of the word. They're clearly believe that they are party to some sort of exalted information that you don't have, and yet they have that cultic look, which is something that I think arises from the following, and this is where I'm going. What I think is happening, the reason why there is no intellectual wing, as you did find in Nazi Germany, is because that wing is provided from outside sources. I believe that is being provided and has been provided over this entire period of 30 years by Western agencies. And I think that what they did, what I am able to infer from what I see, is that what they've done is that this is different to what you might want to call classical Nazism, in the sense that they've applied modern NLP, mind control techniques, and social engineering technology to certain portions of Ukrainian society to make them into, as it were, Russian killing machines. And yes, it is Nazism. But that Nazism, in my opinion, are symbols that have been appended to this core of indoctrination, rather than the other way around. So what I'm saying is that upgraded, highly improved weapon systems of social and mental conditioning have been applied. That's the core of this thing, to which have been applied the language and the slogans and the paraphernalia of Nazism, rather than this type of single-minded brutality being an expression of Nazism. It's actually, Nazism is secondary to this. So I wanted to get to that and cover that and to make those distinctions. Now, there's a corollary to this, which is, and you may not be getting all of this in the West, but there is a whole bevy of videos out there of women, of young girls, saying quite with complete relish how much they would love to chop Russians up and kill them slowly and all the rest of it, okay? And they have the same cultic aspect. And something about cultic, the way that cults work, and I use that word in a quite broad sense, but is that there is a sense on the part of the cultee, if you wish to call it that, which regards everybody outside of this hallowed, privileged area as somehow inferior and woefully ignorant. Now, they may be, depending on what your point of view is, but I see this in this third category of personality, and this affects women. And if you look at who's coming into the West, it's almost entirely females. And the reason is because the Ukrainians won't let men of fighting age, or almost of any age, leave. So you're having this infusion of millions of Ukrainians into Europe, who are indoctrinated by this highly efficient mind control, which, as I say, evinces the language and paraphernalia of Nazism, but really those are just hooks to hang this conditioning to. These girls are going to be marrying Western men and having children and bringing those children up. And I think that this is part of the longer game of what the West has created in Ukraine. So I'm not saying for a moment that it isn't Nazism, certainly in its outward aspect, but I think it's more than this, and it is really a form of social engineering of infusing Europe with an ideological virus, which is going to operate as a sleeper cell and spread through the children that these Ukrainian women will be bringing up when they marry, as they will, Western men. So I just wanted to make those distinctions. Again, in closing, I'm not saying they aren't, Nazis. Yes, they are. But I think there's more to it than that. And I don't believe for a second that the young men that I have seen, with these caches of Mein Kampf and what have you, have really read it. I think that these are symbols. These are almost like having a Manchester United flag on your wall or something. I don't believe they've read it. I've read Mein Kampf. I've read it a couple of times. Quite a lot of it is quite boring. I don't believe that this level of hatred, of almost unstoppable robotic hatred toward Russians and everything Russian, I don't believe that this comes naturally out of the pages of anything that these young men have read. What they've been through is a process of indoctrination and social engineering, which is in a way that the language of Nazism is a cover for this. And these processes are much improved, if you want to use that word, and over what happened in Nazi Germany. And I believe that these have been conceived, and the entire intellectual wing of this thing is invisible because it pertains to the people who implemented this, and that will be the Western intelligence agencies over decades. That's my take on it. I wanted to share that while it's still fresh in my mind, and that's all for now.